Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Backpacking Light podcast. I'm Ryan Jordan.
And I'm Andrew Marshall, and today's episode is a skills short where we give you a few actionable tips to improve your life in the backcountry. Today's topic is layering, something we've been digging into a lot around BPL lately. So Ryan, you did a member Q&A that was all about this topic on September 12th. You published an article about classic three-layer systems on October 19th, and we just spoke to Steven Sieber about how layers interact with waterproof breathable systems in our last podcast, which dropped on October 26th. And we'll put links to all of those in the show notes. But what I'd like to do for this episode is dive into, let's call them non-standard layers, interesting layers, stuff that doesn't quite fit into the classic three-layer system that so many of us are familiar with. So what drove your interest in this topic?
If you look at a conventional three-layer layering system where you've got a base layer for which the purpose is to wick liquid moisture away from your body surface, sweat. And then you have this insulation layer, which the purpose is to keep you warm. Traditionally, that layer has been fleece. And then you have an outer layer, which is to protect you from the elements, keep rain and snow and wind off your body so that those things don't sap heat and energy away from you. So I started thinking about, and that's really the framework of my article on the three-layer system, is this system starts to break down in inclement conditions. Cold, wet, windy weather, the type of weather we get during freak storms in the summer or regularly during the shoulder seasons in the mountains. And so the big part where this really breaks down is it's really difficult to encapsulate yourself in a waterproof breathable layer and expect moisture to evaporate from the system. I don't care how good the breathability of the fabric is or what the MVTR is. You, even with a 75 or 80,000 MVTR fabric, you are not going to expel enough moisture from that garment to keep you dry when you are carrying a pack that's moderately heavy and you're hiking uphill, even if the temperature is 33 degrees and raining and windy. You accumulate too much sweat.
So go ahead. No, go ahead. The
other issue that really struck me about this is there's so many different ways to layer. There's 3, 4, 5 layer systems that all that have different configurations, and we talk about this in the member Q&A. The other issue I wanted to address is that there's some really unique layers out there, like things that are kind of a little bit off the charts and wonky and non-traditional, as you said. And so when I look at those, I always ask myself, what problems are these layers trying to solve and how do they solve them? And so that's kind of like how I'd like to frame today's discussion, is identify the problem that this layer is attempting to solve and why it's potentially solving that problem better than a traditional layer.
Well, let's start with the next to skin layer. So there's a class of base layers that we call Fishnet base layers, and they're basically exactly like what you would imagine that means. Have you tried or used one of these before?
Yes, I've used the ones from Bernier, Norway, and I love them, especially in the winter. And so I'm going to ask the question, what problem are they trying to solve? And because they are Fishnet, which has a huge open weave and there's very little fabric in contact with your skin, you have these giant air pockets that do two things. One, it allows liquid moisture to evaporate much more rapidly from the surface of your skin so that the liquid moisture can pass through to the mid layer at a higher rate. In addition, if you're really sweating, some of that liquid moisture could potentially be in contact with the fibers, if you're using a fleece, with the fibers from the mid layer that's poking through some of those holes. And so you can draw it out by wicking. And so the ability for a fishnet layer to move liquid moisture away from your skin is really, really fast compared to a traditional knit, polyester, or wool base layer.
Yeah, I've used these pretty extensively too, and I agree with everything you said. And a side effect of the open weave is that when you're sweating very heavily, or if you are, God forbid, totally wetted out down to your base layer, these layers, because of this open weave, there's not a lot of fabric here. They don't hold moisture very well, which is a good thing. And they dry quickly when they are completely wet out, especially the synthetic version of these base layers. I take these out of the washing machine and they're basically dry, straight out of the wash.
I flipped my pack raft once on the South Fork Flathead River in the Bob Marshall Wilderness during a 40-degree day, and it was raining, and I was wearing a Bernier polypropylene, I guess it was, mesh base layer underneath my rain jacket, and flipped my boat, got completely submerged and wet. I went to the shore, warmed up with a good fire, but I wrung my base layer out. I squeezed all the water out of it I could, which wasn't very much, and put it back on, put my rain jacket back on, and I felt dry. And that to me was the most enlightening experience I've ever had with one of those base layers.
Yeah, and if you talk to the people at Bernier, they'll tell you that this is the layer that they personally use to go pack rafting in. So if you're a pack rafter listening to this, highly recommend checking out the synthetic Bernier base layer. Well, let's move on to the mid layer. You have one of the garments that we're about to talk about next, and I don't, and it's one of the Cinchi Designs mid layers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's made with Polartec Alpha Direct, which is an insulation. It's made of a woven polyester. It's almost like a fishnet fleece, if you can envision that. So it's got the loft of a brushed polyester fleece, but very loosely woven. And so that loose weave does a couple of things. One, it makes it really, really light. And two, it makes it quite breathable. So you are able to pass through more heat and moisture than you would with a tighter knit fleece. Now, the flip side of that is it's less insulative, right? Mm-hmm. But you can play with these performance factors of breathability and insulation by preserving an open weave in the fleece and increasing the loft of the yarn. So there's this balance of insulation versus breathability, and Polartec makes various weights of this fleece, and so you can use it for different applications. Traditionally, the fleece is sandwiched between an inner woven nylon or polyester layer and an outer woven nylon or polyester layer. And so it behaves in a garment similarly to a high loft synthetic fill garment like, ClimaShield or PrimaLoft.
Right. And this is the insulation that is usually found in when we talk about active insulation garments.
Yes, right? That's exactly right. And the thing that Cinchi Designs and a few other people have done is just used Polartec Alpha Direct as its own insulation piece, as its own layering piece. So you get rid of the shell, you get rid of the lining, and you're left with this really, really light insulation that's fleece-like, but way more breathable and doesn't trap quite the amount of heat. So my favorite way to use this is to wear it next to skin or over a really thin merino wool short sleeve t-shirt, and then throw a wind shirt over it. Mm-hmm. This is one of the most comfortable layering systems I've ever worn for cold, dry, windy conditions. Even conditions where you've got a little bit of drizzle is totally fine. Obviously, when it's really rainy, you might want to add a rain jacket, but a really comfortable light system that does not restrict your movement, and it's eye-opening. It's a really interesting layering piece.
Yeah, you may not know this off the top of your head, but these are pretty. You've mentioned the weight a few times. Do you happen to know what the weight of one of these garments? Like 5 or 6 ounces, right?
The garment I have in a size medium, maybe even a size large. I might have sized this one size up. And it's Polartec Alpha Direct 60. So 60 grams per square meter is the weight of the insulation. And mine weighs 4 ounces.
Yeah. 4
ounces. It is a long sleeve hoodie, and it's got a long length to it. It's generous cut.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, let's move down to feet. I want to talk about a combination of socks. So specifically toe socks like the kind that Injinji makes, and then some other type of insulative layer on top of that. Now, you do more winter backpacking than I do, but it seems like layering a thin maybe a merino wool blend toe sock. I think Injinji's model is called New Wool is their wool layer. Um, with a waterproof sock with some insulation, like a sealskin or something like that, could be a very powerful system to keep your feet warm and dry in the wintertime.
So again, I'm going to ask, what is the problem that the Injinji toe sock is trying to solve? It's separating the toes with their own little barrier to prevent friction and blisters. I think this is as important in the winter as it is in the summer, because oftentimes your winter footwear is stiffer. You don't get quite the it's often waterproof. You don't get quite the breathability out of it, so you accumulate more heat in it. And so the idea that you're going to create this frictionless barrier as a liner sock and then put your insulation on top of that is super appealing to me. Now, I don't always do this. I like just as often wearing a big old thick winter sock inside a trail running shoe. And to me, that's comfortable as well. But the toe sock is intriguing because it allows me to vastly increase my mileage and increase the difficulty of the terrain I'm on. So in the winter, especially when feet are trapped in waterproof breathable footwear, they tend to get more moist. Mm-hmm. There's more heat, and so there's more opportunity for blisters to form, especially when you're dealing with snowshoeing, spiking, and off-trail travel where you are traversing, side hilling, and winter is just harder on your feet in general. And so I really like the idea of the toe sock in the winter.
Yeah, it's kind of like wearing a liner glove with a mitt on top.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You mentioned a waterproof sock. I've experimented with this, and it's in the shoulder seasons. I've worn the toe socks with a waterproof sock when it gets really cold, and that's okay. Especially when you're like trudging through wet, rainy, slushy terrain, and you want to do everything you can to keep moisture away from your feet. But as the temperature drops, that system becomes pretty cold. And so I find myself gravitating more to something that has more insulation, like an Injinji sock underneath a regular insulative sock, and then using waterproof breathable footwear as the barrier instead of a waterproof sock.
All right, I want to talk about neck gaiters for a second. This may not be an unusual layer to some of our listeners, but, personally speaking, I still come across shoulder season and winter backpackers that aren't using neck gaiters. And this astounds me because I consider a neck gaiter, specifically a merino wool extra long neck gaiter, to be maybe the most important part of my layering system. It just adds so much utility and so much warmth for such a small weight and space penalty. Thoughts?
I've used both Buff brand and Smartwool brand merino wool neck gaiters, the long ones in the winter. I agree with you 100%. They go with me on every trip. The ability to just, especially in windy, sloppy conditions, the ability to just seal the top of your layering system, your torso layering system, and bring that neck gaiter all the way up to your nose and sometimes over your nose, throw on some goggles. I mean, you can deal with anything. And in the old days, we had balaclavas. And of course, they're still ubiquitous out there, especially in the winter. But it's difficult to adjust a balaclava to regulate your head warmth versus your neck and face warmth. Mm-hmm. And so I like separating those two. I'd much rather deal with my own beanie cap and neck gaiter than I would a balaclava. It's much harder to adjust heat regulation there. The other thing I really like, I wore this today on my hike, is a half size neck gaiter, which is what I'm wearing around my neck right now. And it was really sunny, gorgeous blue sky day out there today, but cold and windy. And so I wanted to wear my baseball hat to protect my head and face from the sun, but I wanted to, provide some coverage for my ears, and a beanie hat and a baseball hat can work depending on the beanie. The one I have and I'm using right now doesn't work real well, but this one works great. So I take the neck gaiter and drape it over the top of my brim and then bring it down around the sides of my ears. And it's a great combination. I was very comfortable today.
On a related note, I tend to, especially in the winter, I can feel very claustrophobic if I'm wearing a neck gaiter, especially if I have a bunch of other material around that sort of neck area. And because I wear a wide brimmed hat as my kind of go to
Yeah.
3-season hat, sometimes in the winter, depending on where I am, I have developed my layering system to be almost completely free of hoods. And if you don't think about it, if you just go out and sort of buy stuff, you might end up with a hood on your long sleeve shirt like I'm wearing, and on your mid layer, and on your wind jacket, and on your rain jacket, and you can have 4 hoods on, and I have no patience for that. So I have one layer in my system with a hood, which is this long sleeve merino wool t-shirt, and that's all the hood I need unless I'm in very cold conditions, in which case I'll bring along like an exterior down-filled hood just to sleep in.
Hoods create all sorts of issues in cold conditions because they trap so much heat that it's once you have a hood up, you only can regulate the aperture of the hood. And so that there's not a lot of heat flow going in and out of there. And so if you want to really amp up the flexibility of your ventilation system for your head, go to a neck gaiter. It'll change your life.
I will even sometimes look for rain jackets without hoods, which takes us into this next topic here, which is unusual pieces of rain gear.
Most American-made, and for that matter, European-made modern rainwear they have adjustable cuffs, with the idea that this can aid in ventilation, and it does have some impact. It's small. You have an adjustable hem with a draw cord at the hem that you can use to bring airflow in through the bottom of the jacket. You have pit zips. You have side pockets that hopefully sit above your backpack harness so you can access them while wearing the pack. And in the old days, it was really common for these pockets to be mesh backed. And so they provided another avenue of ventilation. And then you have anorak versus full zip designs, which of course, they offer different levels of ventilation depending on how deep you pull the zipper down. So all these things can contribute. Oh, and then you have the hood aperture. So the hood, depending on the design of the hood, it can provide rain protection, but have a very wide aperture that can allow cold and hot air to exchange through the neck area. So you have all these options for layering. Ultralight backpackers love to discard as many of those as possible and save every gram as possible on a rain jacket. I understand this, especially for summer backpacking in places like the Sierras or even the Rocky Mountains, where rain comes in the form of the occasional thunderstorm, if it even comes. And then the rain jacket sits in your pack most of the rest of the trip. So for that case, I think a very simple rain jacket with elastic non-adjustable cuffs, elastic non-adjustable hem, even an anorak design, skip the pit zips, do a minimalist hood, all fine. But once you have to spend a lot of time in cold, wet, windy conditions where your rain jacket has to be worn for several hours a day while hiking and while carrying a heavy pack and while climbing hills and just generally sweating up a storm, you need something more. And so that's where a full featured rain jacket with pit zips and mesh pockets and things like that might be really helpful. The non-traditional part of this that I want to talk about is when you wear a backpack strap and you wear shoulder straps, pit zips can only do so much. So now you've basically covered the entire bottom of the rain jacket, and you have prevented cold air from coming in, cold, dry air from coming into your rain jacket system. Now you have to rely on in the chest area, because now you've created this rectangle of that's sealed between your shoulder straps and your hip belt. So you only get the front zipper to allow for air exchange around your chest. You only get the pit zips to allow for air exchange in and out around the sides of the jacket. So 2 products I want to bring up are the Paramo Velez Smock and the Buffalo Tech Light series shirts. Both of these garments have side zips that zip up from the hem of the jacket all the way up to the pits, or in one design that Paramo has up into the chest region. So now you can wear your backpack belt underneath your rain jacket and unzip these zips, and they're usually two-way zippers, and so you can keep them sealed at the bottom and have a nice big aperture down on the sides, and it brings more air into your system. Now, some rain jacket manufacturers can accomplish this a little bit by providing a two-way zipper on a full-length zippered rain jacket. And so with a two-length zipper, you can put your hip belt on under the front of the jacket at least, and then unzip from the bottom to get some ventilation, but you sacrifice some rain protection. So these rain jackets from Paramo and Buffalo, they have the ability to, zip up from the sides on both sides, and it is remarkable how comfortable those jackets are in an all-day rain. That's another thing that when I first tried jackets like this, I was like, whoa, why don't more manufacturers do this, especially here in the United States? And I don't know, and I don't have the answer to that question other than it's probably weird to American consumers, and they see this product in REI or someplace, and they'll just be like, yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah, and I wonder too if it might have something to do with just the vast range of weather conditions and geography we have in the U.S. as opposed to you're hiking in the UK, you're going to be running into all day rain almost no matter where you are. And that brings me to the Pertex and pile systems, which are almost invisible here in the U.S., but which are quite common in Europe. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so the idea is to take a pile, and the Buffalo and Paramo garments that I mentioned are both kind of modeled based on this. And it's a brushed pile lining for the jacket and a breathable, non-waterproof shell for the outer shell. So now you've increased the MVTR by making a more breathable garment. You've lightly insulated it on the inside. The idea here is you're creating a vapor pressure gradient by entrapping a little bit of heat on the inside face of the jacket that will help drive that moisture out and hopefully combat rain coming in. It requires an exceptional DWR treatment. And once that DWR treatment starts to break down and or rain becomes really heavy, then the rain is going to overpower your exertion level and water will seep in. But the idea is to create a directional gradient of vapor pressure that drives moisture out of your system. I think the Paramo system, based on my experience, works a little bit better than the Buffalo system, but I've used the Buffalo in dry, wintry conditions and even snowy, drizzly conditions, and it does fine.
All right. Well, final thoughts to wrap up our unusual layering skills short?
Yeah, just don't get locked into what everybody said is the conventional way to go, because there are lots of options, and there's lots of options to change the order of layers. And the example I'll give here is a lot of hikers will take a base layer, a fleece, a wind shirt, and that will be their kind of non-rain system for cold and windy weather. And one of the things I really like to do is take the base layer, put the wind shirt on top of that, add the fleece on top of the wind shirt. What this does, if you reverse those two garments, is it makes the whole system a little bit less insulated, because now your airy fleece is exposed to the wind, and the wind can take some of that heat away, but it can take the edge off on cold, windy days, where if you put the wind shirt over the fleece or the base layer, you might be sweating. And so I found, just tweaking and playing with your layering systems can create some surprise aha moments that are really nice and can add a lot to your comfort.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Backpacking Light podcast. The Backpacking Light podcast is advertising free, thanks to the membership fees paid by Backpacking Light members. A BackpackingLight.com membership gives you access to 20 years of archives, forums, and online courses. And don't forget, if you're an unlimited member, you'll get the video version of this podcast for free as a part of your membership. So please consider supporting this podcast and become a member right now at BackpackingLight.com/membership.
You can download the show notes for this episode at backpackinglight.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. It does help other people find the show.
Thanks for listening to the Backpacking Light podcast. I'm Andrew Marshall.
And I'm Ryan Jordan. And if we can leave you with one parting message, it's this: pack less, be more, because lighter is better. Happy trails, everybody.
So I shoulder my backpack, walk away from the car.